The first time I realized I had disappeared, I thought I was losing my mind. I wasn't talking about memories. I was talking about photographs. Every picture in our house showed my father, my stepmother, my little half-brother, birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations, school graduations, even our annual beach trips. Everyone was there, except me. It was as if I had never existed. When I asked my stepmother where all my pictures had gone, she smiled, the kind of smile that looks warm to everyone else, but sends a chill through you. She simply said, "Maybe you're remembering things differently." For years, I started believing her. Maybe I had imagined sitting beside Dad at Christmas. Maybe I wasn't standing next to him at my 8th birthday. Maybe I had never gone on those vacations after all. When enough people tell you that you're wrong, you begin to question your own memories, even when they're true. Then, 15 years later, while cleaning out Grandpa's old attic after his funeral, I found one dusty cardboard box. Inside were hundreds of original photographs. Every single one showed the same thing: me, standing exactly where I remembered, smiling beside my father, holding his hand, blowing out birthday candles, opening Christmas presents, fishing at the lake, building snowmen. The life I had been told never happened, had been captured forever on film and hidden away. That single forgotten photo album didn't just restore my childhood. It exposed the biggest lie my stepmother had spent 15 years carefully creating. By the time my father saw those pictures, he wasn't asking where they came from. He was asking one question that changed our family forever. What else has she lied about? But to understand why one photograph destroyed an entire family, you first need to know what happened after my mother died. My name is Ethan. I'm 28 years old. For most of my childhood, I believed families were forever. I learned how wrong I was before I turned 10. My mother died when I was 7. Cancer. Fast. Merciless. One year she was helping me with homework. The next, I was standing beside a small white coffin that looked far too small to hold someone's entire life. I didn't understand funerals. I only understood that everyone kept saying my mother was in a better place. The only place I wanted her to be was home. Dad tried his best. He really did. He had never learned how to cook. He burned pancakes almost every Saturday. He packed my school lunches with far too many cookies because he didn't know what else to include. Sometimes he forgot to wash my soccer uniform until the morning of a game. We laughed about it, because we were figuring things out together. For 2 years, it was just the two of us. Every Friday night was pizza night. Every Sunday morning, we visited Mom's favorite flower garden. Every birthday, we released one white balloon into the sky. Dad always told me, "Your mother would be proud of the young man you're becoming." Those words carried me through some of the hardest days of my childhood. Then one evening, Dad came home smiling. It had been a long time since I'd seen that smile. He sat beside me on the couch. "Ethan, I've met someone." I looked at him. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't angry. I wasn't excited. I was simply confused. He continued, "Her name is Rebecca. I think I'd like you to meet her." I nodded, because that's what good kids do. They nod, even when their hearts aren't ready. The following weekend, Rebecca came to dinner. She arrived carrying homemade apple pie. She complimented our house. She laughed at Dad's jokes. She even brought me a new baseball glove. Everyone thought she was wonderful, including me. At first, she spoke softly. She remembered my favorite ice cream. She asked about school. She listened when I talked about my mother. Or at least, she appeared to. Looking back, I realized she spent that first evening studying us, learning where every memory lived, learning how our family worked, learning exactly how to become part of it. 6 months later, Dad proposed. 3 months after that, they were married. Life changed faster than I expected. Rebecca moved into our house. The furniture slowly changed. The curtains changed. The paint colors changed. Even the smell of the house changed. Dad said she was making it feel like a home again. I smiled. But secretly, It had already felt like home to me. The first thing Rebecca packed away wasn't furniture. It wasn't dishes. It wasn't decorations. It was my mother's photographs. She carefully removed every framed picture from the living room, every picture from the hallway, every picture from Dad's office. She wrapped each one in newspaper, placed them inside storage boxes, then carried them into the attic. I stood at the bottom of the stairs watching. "Why are you putting Mom's pictures away?" She smiled gently. "We're starting a new chapter, sweetheart." Dad overheard us. He looked uncomfortable. Rebecca touched his hand. "We're not throwing them away. We're just making room." Dad nodded. "It doesn't mean we loved your mother any less." I wanted to believe him, so I did. A few weeks later, Rebecca suggested we take a new family portrait. Dad loved the idea. "So we'll have our first picture together." We went to a photography studio. I wore my nicest blue shirt. Dad wore his favorite gray suit. Rebecca wore a cream-colored dress. The photographer arranged us carefully. Dad placed one hand on my shoulder. Rebecca smiled. The camera flashed. It seemed like a happy day. When the framed portrait arrived 2 weeks later, something felt different. I couldn't explain it. Not yet. But years later, I would realize. That was the day I unknowingly became invisible. The family portrait hung above our fireplace. Every visitor who entered the house saw it. Dad smiled every time he walked past it. Rebecca often stopped to straighten the frame. She acted proud of it. I looked at it almost every day. Something about it bothered me. I just couldn't explain what. One Saturday morning, Dad was at work. Rebecca was dusting the living room. I stood in front of the portrait for several minutes. Then I asked, "Can I see the original picture?" She looked at me. "What original?" "The one the photographer took." She smiled politely. "This is the original." I frowned. "No. I mean before it was printed." She laughed. "Oh, sweetheart. Pictures don't work like that." At 8 years old, I accepted the answer. Years later, I would realize she had lied. Not long afterward, I began noticing small changes around the house, not big ones, tiny ones, the kind adults never seem to notice. The framed picture from our beach vacation looked different. The Christmas picture in the hallway looked different. The camping picture beside Dad's office looked different. Every time I stared at them, I felt something was missing, but I couldn't figure out what. One afternoon, my best friend Noah came over after school. We were building a model airplane in the dining room. While looking for glue, he wandered into the hallway. A few seconds later, he called out, "Ethan! Is this your little brother?" I walked over. He pointed to a family photo. Dad, Rebecca, a little baby. No me. I smiled awkwardly. That picture was taken before he was born. Noah looked confused. "It says Christmas." I looked closer. He was right. The date engraved beneath the frame read, Christmas, 2007. I was 9 years old that Christmas. I remembered opening a bicycle beside that exact fireplace. I remembered sitting on Dad's lap. I remembered wearing green pajamas. So why wasn't I in the picture? That night, I searched my bedroom. Inside my closet was an old shoebox. Mom used to keep family photographs there. The box was empty. Every picture was gone. The next morning I asked Dad, "Dad, where are all the old family photos?" He looked surprised. "I thought Rebecca organized them." I turned toward her. She was making coffee. Without even looking up, she answered, "They're in storage." Dad nodded. "That's right. We needed more space." I accepted the answer, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. Over the next year, more photographs appeared around the house. Birthday parties, family dinners, school events. Every new picture looked perfect. Too perfect. Everyone smiled. Everyone looked happy. Everyone, except me, because I wasn't there. At first, I assumed I simply wasn't around when the pictures were taken. Then I remembered something strange. I had been at every birthday, every barbecue, every Christmas. every Thanksgiving. I remembered helping Dad hang lights. I remembered decorating cookies. I remembered fishing at the lake. So why couldn't I find myself in a single photograph? When I asked Rebecca, she always had an answer. You were at a friend's house. You didn't want to come. You stayed inside. You were sick. You missed that trip. You came later. Every explanation sounded reasonable, until you added them together. One evening, Dad and I were cleaning the garage. I found an old camping lantern. It immediately brought back a memory. Dad, remember when we camped near Pine Lake? He smiled. I caught the biggest fish. I laughed. No, I caught the biggest fish. He laughed too. You're right. Rebecca walked into the garage. Pine Lake? She smiled. We've never been there together. Dad looked confused. Didn't we? Rebecca shook her head. I think you're remembering another trip. Dad frowned. Maybe. Then he continued organizing tools. I stood there speechless, because I knew exactly what trip I meant. I remembered everything. The rainstorm, the broken tent zipper, the marshmallows Dad burned, the photograph he took beside the lake. Yet somehow, Rebecca had convinced him it never happened. That was the first moment I became afraid. Not of Rebecca, of my own memory. Maybe I really was remembering things wrong. Maybe grief had confused my childhood. Maybe losing Mom had mixed everything together. Children trust adults, especially the adults raising them. When Rebecca corrected my memories, I believed her, even when every part of me wanted to argue. By the time I turned 12, something had changed inside me. I stopped talking about Mom. I stopped asking about old vacations. I stopped mentioning birthdays. Every time I did, Rebecca gently corrected me. Eventually, I corrected myself. Then came Parent Appreciation Day at school. Students were asked to bring one family photograph for a classroom project. Everyone else proudly carried framed pictures. I searched the entire house. Nothing. Not one photograph with me and Mom. Not one picture with just Dad and me. Not one birthday. Not one Christmas. Nothing. I finally asked Rebecca, "Can I have one picture of Mom?" She looked genuinely sympathetic. I wish I could. But I think they were damaged during storage. Damaged? She nodded sadly. Water leak. It ruined almost everything. I believed her. Because why would an adult lie about something like that? The next day, I went to school empty-handed. When the teacher asked where my family picture was, I quietly answered, "We don't have any." The room became silent. Several classmates looked at me with pity. One girl whispered, "That's so sad." She was right. I just didn't know how sad. Because the truth wasn't that we had no family photographs. The truth was much worse. Someone had made sure I would never see them. Years passed. Rebecca became more confident. Dad became busier. My little half-brother Liam grew older. He had no idea anything was wrong. To him, the photographs on the walls had always looked that way. He believed I simply wasn't around much when he was little, because that's what he'd been told. Then, on my 16th birthday, I accidentally overheard a conversation that changed everything. Rebecca was talking on the phone. She didn't know I was standing outside the kitchen. I heard her laugh. Then she said one sentence I'll never forget. If you erase someone slowly enough, eventually everyone forgets they were ever there. I froze. Was she talking about me? Or was I imagining that too? I wanted to walk into the kitchen. I wanted to confront her. But something stopped me. Instead, I quietly turned around, walked back upstairs. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if the missing photographs weren't an accident after all. They were part of something much bigger, something Rebecca had been carefully building for years, and I had only just begun to see it. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking questions, not because I had given up, because I realized something important. Every time I asked Rebecca about the missing photographs, she already had an answer waiting. Too quickly, too perfectly, almost as if she'd rehearsed them. So instead of asking, I started watching, listening, remembering. Over the next 2 years, I noticed things most people never would. Rebecca never dusted the framed photographs herself. She always carried them into the kitchen first, closed the door, then brought them back a few minutes later. I never understood why, until much later. Whenever relatives visited, she controlled the conversations. If someone mentioned my mother, Rebecca immediately changed the subject. If they talked about old vacations, she laughed and told a different story. If someone remembered something involving me, she somehow redirected the conversation toward Liam. She never argued. She simply replaced the memory, one story at a time. The strange part was, nobody seemed to notice. Because manipulation doesn't always happen through shouting. Sometimes, it happens through repetition. Tell the same version of history often enough, and eventually people stop remembering the original. I graduated high school, moved into a small apartment, started working for a construction company. Dad helped me carry furniture upstairs. When we finished, he looked around the empty apartment and smiled. I'm proud of you. Those 4 words meant everything. Even after all the confusion, I never doubted Dad loved me. What I doubted was whether he realized what had been happening. Life became busy. Work, bills, long hours, adult responsibilities. The missing photographs slowly faded into the background. Not because I'd forgotten, because I'd convinced myself there was nothing I could do. Then one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Dad called unexpectedly. His voice sounded tired. Ethan, I need to tell you something. I immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? He took a long breath. It's Grandpa. 3 days later, we stood together at the cemetery. Grandpa had lived to 86. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. But he was the kind of man everyone respected. He remembered birthdays, fixed broken bicycles, taught neighborhood kids how to fish. He believed every problem could be solved with patience, and every story deserved to be heard. After the funeral, the family gathered at Grandpa's old farmhouse. People shared memories, laughed, cried, looked through old belongings. Rebecca stayed unusually quiet. She kept checking her watch, almost like she wanted to leave. Dad walked over to me. Grandpa always wanted you to have his woodworking tools. I smiled. He taught me everything. Dad nodded. He said you were the only one patient enough to listen. The tools were stored upstairs, in the attic. I climbed the narrow wooden staircase alone. The attic smelled exactly as I remembered. Old wood, dust, machine oil, summer heat trapped beneath the roof. Everything seemed frozen in time. Grandpa's fishing rods, old suitcases, Christmas decorations, boxes stacked almost to the ceiling. I spent nearly an hour organizing tools. Then I noticed something strange. Behind an old wardrobe, hidden beneath a faded army blanket, sat a large wooden trunk. I had never seen it before. The brass lock had already rusted open. I lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of photo albums. Not one, not two. Dozens. Every album carefully labeled, year after year. My hands started shaking. Grandpa never threw photographs away. He documented everything. Every birthday, every vacation, every family barbecue, every fishing trip, every Christmas morning. If anyone still had the originals, it would be him. I opened the first album. Inside were black and white photographs from long before I was born. Dad as a teenager, Grandma smiling in the garden, Grandpa teaching him to drive. I smiled, then reached for another album, the year after Mom and Dad married. More photographs, family picnics, road trips, camping. Then another album, Then 2006, each page carefully protected by clear plastic sleeves. Finally, I found the album labeled 2008. My heart skipped. That was the year Rebecca married Dad, the same year everything started changing. I slowly turned the first page. There was the wedding. Dad smiling. Rebecca smiling. Me, standing beside Dad in a little gray suit. Exactly where I remembered. I turned another page. Our first Christmas together. There I was, opening presents. Rebecca beside me. Dad laughing. Exactly as I'd always remembered. Another page. Our beach vacation. I was building a sandcastle with Dad. Rebecca was reading under an umbrella. The photograph hanging in Dad's living room only showed the two of them. But this original showed all three of us. I couldn't breathe. I turned page after page. Birthday parties, school awards, camping trips, Halloween costumes, Thanksgiving dinners. Every memory I'd been told never happened was right there.
Captured forever, untouched, unedited, real. Tears filled my eyes. Not because I had found photographs, because I had found proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. Proof that my childhood had been stolen. One picture at a time. Then something slipped from between two pages. A small envelope, yellow with age. Across the front, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 words. For Ethan, if you're ever forgotten. I stared at the envelope. My heart pounded. How could Grandpa have known? How could he possibly have guessed what had happened? Before I could open it, I heard footsteps climbing the attic stairs. Heavy footsteps. Fast. Someone else had realized what I had found. The footsteps grew louder. Heavy. Hurried. Determined. I quickly slid the envelope back inside the album. The attic door swung open. It was Dad. He stopped halfway up the stairs and looked around. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. I forced a smile. Sorry. I got distracted. Dad chuckled. Your grandfather never threw anything away. No. He definitely didn't. He walked toward me. Then his eyes landed on the open photo albums. His smile faded. I haven't seen these in years. He knelt beside me, carefully picked up one album. His fingers brushed across the dusty cover. For a moment, he looked like a little boy remembering his own childhood. We sat together without speaking, turning pages, smiling at old memories, laughing at terrible haircuts, pointing at birthday cakes that leaned sideways because Grandpa never baked very well. For the first time in years, it felt like we were simply father and son again. Then we reached the Christmas pages. Dad stopped. His smile disappeared. He stared at one photograph, then frowned. That's strange. I looked at the picture. It showed the 3 of us, Dad, Rebecca, and me, standing in front of the Christmas tree. Dad whispered, I don't remember this picture looking like that. I stayed quiet. He turned another page, then another. Each one showed me beside him. Every vacation, every birthday, every family dinner. Finally, he looked directly at me. Ethan, the picture over our fireplace, it doesn't look like this. I slowly shook my head. No, it doesn't. Dad looked confused. Maybe we framed a different photograph. I didn't answer, because deep down, we both knew it wasn't a different photograph. It was the same moment, the same clothes, the same Christmas tree, the same gifts. Only one difference. In the picture hanging in our house, I wasn't there. Dad quickly stood up. We're taking these home. Before I could respond, another voice came from the attic doorway. No. Rebecca. She stood perfectly still, but her face had lost all its color. Her eyes weren't looking at Dad. They were locked on the albums.
Dad smiled. I didn't know these were still here. Rebecca forced a laugh. I thought they were ruined years ago. Dad frowned. Ruined? You told Ethan they were damaged in a water leak. She hesitated. That's what Grandpa told me. I looked at her. Grandpa would never have said that. Never. Dad picked up another album. These are in perfect condition. Rebecca stepped forward. Maybe we should leave them here. They're old. They're fragile. They should stay where Grandpa kept them. Dad looked surprised. Why? They're family memories. Rebecca's answer came too quickly. They belong to everyone. Dad smiled. Exactly. So everyone should see them. For the first time since I'd known her, Rebecca looked frightened. Not nervous, not uncomfortable. Frightened. Dad carried the albums downstairs. I picked up the wooden trunk. Rebecca followed behind us. Silent, watching every step. The family was gathered in the living room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, Liam, everyone. Dad placed the first album on the coffee table. You all have to see these. People gathered around. They smiled as they flipped through the pages. Grandpa's old fishing trips, family birthdays, Christmas mornings, children running through sprinklers. Everyone laughed, until Aunt Susan suddenly stopped. Rebecca, she pointed at one picture. Why does this look different? Rebecca swallowed. What do you mean? Aunt Susan stood, walked across the room, and returned carrying the framed family photo from the bookshelf. She placed it beside the album. The room went quiet. They were the same picture, same Christmas tree, same wrapping paper, same fireplace, same date. But one showed 4 people. The other showed only 3. Someone whispered, "Where's Ethan?" No one answered. Dad stared at both photographs, back and forth, again and again. He looked confused, then concerned, then deeply unsettled. He quietly asked, Rebecca, how is this possible? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Uncle Mark leaned closer. That's not cropping. No. He pointed at the framed picture. Look at the sofa. The cushions have been moved. The shadows are different. This wasn't cropped. It was edited. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward Rebecca. Dad spoke again, much more firmly this time. Who edited these photographs? Rebecca looked around the room, searching for an escape. There wasn't one. It wasn't. She stopped. Dad held up another photograph. This time, it was from our beach vacation. The original showed me building a sandcastle beside him. The framed version showed only Dad and Rebecca. The space where I'd been standing had been replaced with empty sand. Another photograph. Halloween. I was dressed as a pirate. The framed version showed only Liam years later. The background had been changed. Even the decorations had been altered. Then another. My 10th birthday. The original showed Dad helping me blow out candles. The version hanging in our hallway had no birthday boy. Only Rebecca smiling beside an empty chair. One by one, every altered photograph was matched with its original. One by one. The lies became impossible to deny. Liam looked completely confused. Dad, why isn't Ethan in our pictures? No one answered him. Then Dad slowly sat down. His hands trembled as he looked through 15 years of family history. His voice was barely above a whisper. This wasn't one mistake. He turned another page. Or 2. Another page. Or 10. He closed the album. This took years. Then he looked directly at Rebecca, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had defended. the woman he had built a life with. His next question was so quiet that somehow it hurt even more. Why were you trying to erase my son? Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. But before she could answer, Grandpa's envelope slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. Every person in the room stared at the faded handwriting. For Ethan, if you're ever forgotten. Dad picked it up. His hands were shaking. He slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and one final photograph. The photograph that would expose not only Rebecca's lies, but the real reason Grandpa had hidden the originals all those years ago. Nobody spoke. Not a single word. The only sound in Grandpa's living room was the ticking of the old grandfather clock against the far wall. Tick, tick, tick. Dad stared at the envelope in his hands. The faded handwriting was unmistakable. For Ethan, if you're ever forgotten. His fingers trembled. Not because the paper was old, because Grandpa had somehow known this day would come. Dad carefully unfolded the letter. A second photograph slipped onto the coffee table. It showed my 8th birthday. I was sitting on Dad's shoulders. Mom's favorite blue bicycle stood beside me. Rebecca was there too. She had only been part of our lives for a few weeks. She wasn't smiling at the camera. She was looking directly at me. Her expression wasn't warm. It wasn't loving. It wasn't even neutral. It was cold, almost resentful. Nobody in the room had ever noticed it before. Now, everyone did. Dad quietly picked up the photograph. He looked at Rebecca, then back at the picture. I've never seen you look at Ethan like this. Rebecca lowered her eyes. She said nothing. Dad began reading Grandpa's letter aloud. If you're reading this, then something I feared has finally happened. The room became even quieter. Ethan, your grandfather isn't perfect. But I've lived long enough to know that people rarely destroy memories all at once. They remove them little by little. One picture. One story. One conversation. Until the truth begins to disappear. I felt chills run down my arms. Those words described my childhood perfectly. Dad continued. About 6 months after Rebecca married into our family, I noticed something strange. The framed photographs in your father's house no longer matched the originals in my albums. Several relatives looked at Rebecca. She remained silent. At first, I believed it was an accident. Perhaps new frames. Perhaps different prints. But every visit brought another missing photograph. Sometimes Ethan disappeared. Sometimes his mother disappeared. Sometimes entire years of memories quietly changed. Dad stopped reading. His breathing had become heavier. He turned another page. I confronted Rebecca once. Everyone looked up, even Rebecca. Apparently, she hadn't known Grandpa had written about that conversation. Dad continued. She smiled and told me she simply wanted the house to reflect the family as it is now. I told her that building a new family should never require erasing the old one. She promised it would never happen again. Dad slowly looked around the room. It did. No one disagreed. The letter continued. After that conversation, I began keeping every original photograph. Every negative. Every printed copy. I stored them where no one would think to look. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted proof. Aunt Susan quietly wiped away tears. So Grandpa knew. Dad nodded silently. The next paragraph changed everything. I never told your father. Not because I doubted he loved Ethan, but because I believed he would eventually notice the truth himself. Dad lowered his head. I didn't. His voice cracked. I should have. For the first time that afternoon, Dad cried. Real tears. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears of regret. He looked toward me. I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I should have noticed. I couldn't answer, because I had waited almost 20 years to hear those words. Dad finished the letter. If the truth has finally come out, remember this. Photographs preserve faces, but love preserves memories. Never allow anyone to convince you that your place in this family can be edited away. Love, Grandpa. The room remained silent. Several relatives openly cried. Even Uncle Mark removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. Dad carefully folded the letter, then looked directly at Rebecca. His expression had completely changed. Not angry, heartbroken. Tell me the truth. Rebecca stared at the floor. I have. Dad shook his head. No. You haven't. He pointed toward the albums. Those pictures didn't edit themselves. Another silence. Long, heavy, almost unbearable. Finally, Rebecca spoke. I hated seeing her. Nobody understood. Dad frowned. Seeing who? Your first wife. Rebecca wiped away a tear. She was everywhere. Every room. Every hallway. Every shelf. I felt like I'd married a ghost. She took a shaky breath. I wasn't jealous of Ethan. I was jealous of the life you had before me. No one interrupted. You laughed differently in those pictures. You smiled differently. You looked happy. She looked at Dad. I wanted us to have our own memories. Her voice broke. But every time someone visited, they talked about her. They talked about Ethan's mother. They compared me to her. I got tired of living in someone else's shadow. Dad quietly answered. So you erased my son? Rebecca immediately shook her head. No, that wasn't how it started. I only replaced one picture, then another, then another. I kept telling myself it wasn't hurting anyone. But after a while, I couldn't stop. She looked at me. I convinced myself that if the pictures changed, the memories would too. Her shoulders began shaking. I was wrong. Aunt Susan spoke softly. You let Ethan believe he was imagining his own childhood. Rebecca covered her face. I know. I know. Liam, now 16, looked completely devastated. He turned to Rebecca. You told me Ethan hardly came home when I was little. She couldn't answer. You said he didn't like us. Still no answer. You lied to me too. Rebecca burst into tears. I did. Dad slowly stood. He looked around the room, then toward the hallway where dozens of altered photographs still hung on the walls of our family home. He spoke quietly, but with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, every original picture goes back where it belongs. Then he looked at me. And this family starts telling the truth. I thought that would be the end. I thought restoring the photographs would restore everything. I was wrong. Because the next morning, while replacing the pictures, Dad discovered something hidden behind one of the frames. Something Rebecca had never expected anyone to find, and that discovery would force her to confess one final secret, one even Grandpa never knew. The next morning, Dad was the first one awake. Before anyone else came downstairs, he carried every altered photograph into the living room. The originals Grandpa had protected for years were stacked neatly beside them. One by one, he planned to put our family's real history back on the walls. I arrived just after breakfast. Dad was already standing on a ladder. He removed the large Christmas portrait that had hung above the fireplace for nearly 15 years. He handed it to me. Can you pass me the original? I picked up Grandpa's photograph. Dad carefully placed it into the frame. For the first time in almost 2 decades, there we were. Dad, Rebecca, and me. Exactly as Christmas had happened. Dad stared at it for a long time, then quietly whispered, I don't remember the room feeling this empty. I looked at him. What do you mean? He smiled sadly. I spent 15 years looking at these walls, and I never realized my own son was missing. As he lifted the next picture from the hallway, something unexpected happened. A small folded piece of paper slipped from behind the frame. It floated to the floor. Dad frowned. What's this? I picked it up. It wasn't old. The paper was clean, modern, folded several times. Across the front, in Rebecca's handwriting, were 3 words. Photo schedule, keep. Dad unfolded it. The room became silent. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. A detailed list. Every room in the house. Every picture frame. Every album. Every photograph. Beside each one, there were handwritten notes. Replace with new version. Remove Ethan. Store original. Do not let Daniel see negatives. Move album before Christmas. My hands went cold. This wasn't something done in a moment of grief. It wasn't a single bad decision. It was a plan. Carefully organized. Repeated. Maintained for years. Dad slowly sat down. He read every page. Again and again. His eyes filled with tears. Not because of the photographs anymore. Because someone he trusted had planned every lie. Just then, Rebecca walked into the hallway. She immediately saw the paper in Dad's hands. Her face turned pale. She knew exactly what he'd found. Dad didn't raise his voice. He simply held up the list. Is this yours? She stared at it. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then, she quietly nodded. Yes. No excuses. No denial. Just one honest answer. Dad asked, "Why write it down?" Rebecca looked around the house. I was afraid I'd miss one. Those words hurt more than shouting ever could, because they revealed just how intentional everything had been. She slowly sat in the chair across from us. I wanted our home to look like the family I wished we'd been. She looked at me. Every time I saw Ethan in those pictures, I remembered that Daniel had loved someone before me. I hated that feeling, so I tried to erase it. She looked at Dad. I wasn't trying to erase your son. I was trying to erase my own insecurity. Then she lowered her head. But I ended up doing both. Dad remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. You didn't just change photographs. You changed our memories. You made Ethan question his own childhood. You made Liam believe his brother didn't love him. You made me fail the one job that mattered most, protecting my son. Rebecca nodded through tears. I know. There isn't anything I can say to fix it. For the first time, Liam walked over to me. He looked embarrassed. I believed what Mom told me. I thought you stayed away because you didn't want me. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I smiled, then pulled him into a hug. You were a kid. So was I. Neither of us had chosen this. Over the next several weeks, the house slowly changed. Not with new furniture or fresh paint. With truth. Every altered picture disappeared. Every original photograph returned to its place. The hallway once again showed birthdays, camping trips, school concerts, Christmas mornings, and every picture included everyone who had actually been there. No more, no less. Dad did something else. He bought a large oak photo album. On the first page, he wrote one sentence in neat handwriting. Our family, exactly as we were. Every original photograph Grandpa had protected went into that album. Nothing was edited. Nothing was removed. Nothing was rewritten. Rebecca moved into a small apartment a month later. Dad and she separated peacefully. There were no shouting matches, No courtroom battles, no revenge, just the quiet ending of a marriage built on secrets. Months later, their divorce was finalized. Dad later told me, I can forgive mistakes, but I can't build a life on a lie. As for Rebecca, she wrote me a letter, not asking for forgiveness, not asking to come back, simply taking responsibility. She admitted that every altered photograph had come from her own fear of never feeling like she truly belonged. She wrote, I thought if I could erase the past, I could finally become part of your family's future. Instead, I destroyed the very family I wanted to join. I never hated her. Hate would have kept me trapped in the same past she tried so hard to rewrite. Instead, I chose something different. Distance, peace, and acceptance. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant refusing to let those missing photographs define the rest of my life. A year after Grandpa's funeral, Dad invited the whole family back to the farmhouse, not for another goodbye, for a new beginning. We gathered on the porch. A professional photographer set up a camera. Dad smiled and said, This time, we're doing one thing differently. He looked directly at me. Ethan, stand beside me. I did. Liam stood on my other side. Dad wrapped one arm around each of us. The photographer counted. 3, 2, 1. The camera clicked, then clicked again, and again. This time, no one would ever disappear from those photographs, because Dad had already made extra copies, one for every member of the family, and one final copy. He placed inside Grandpa's old wooden trunk, right beside the original albums, where the truth had waited patiently all those years. Sometimes, people think photographs only capture faces. They're wrong. Photographs capture belonging. They remind us who stood beside us, who loved us, who shared our happiest moments. But the real lesson Grandpa left behind wasn't hidden in a picture. It was hidden in the courage to protect the truth. Because memories can be manipulated, stories can be rewritten, pictures can be edited. But sooner or later, the truth has a remarkable way of developing, just like an old photograph.